Today, the State Route 41 bridge, historically known as the Broadford Bridge, east of Troy, Ohio, is a quiet place. Kayakers drift along the Great Miami River, cyclists pass through on afternoon rides, and families walk the trails where the river bends gently around the edge of town. It's difficult to imagine that this peaceful crossing once stood at the center of what many believe could become a violent uprising. But in the summer of 1842, fear spread throughout Miami County. Rumors traveled down dusty farm roads that hundreds of angry farmers were preparing to march on Troy. Militia companies assembled, and armed patrols guarded the streets. Campfires burned beside the river as soldiers waited for an attack that many believed could come at any moment. The conflict became known as the Broadford Bridge War, and while no shots were ever fired, the story reveals a fascinating moment when whiskey, politics, pride, and public outrage nearly pushed a small Ohio community into chaos. To understand the Broadford Bridge War, one must first understand the growing temperance movement of early America. By the 1840s, reformers across the country warned that alcohol was poisoning society. Ministers preached against liquor from church pulpits. Temperance societies held rallies and lectures, and newspaper editors blamed whiskey for crime, poverty, and broken families. In towns like Troy, many citizens embraced the movement enthusiastically. But outside of town, the farms and rural settlements of Miami County, people saw things differently. Whiskey was a part of everyday life. Farmers distilled surplus grain into liquor. Taverns served as gathering places. A jug of whiskey around the dinner table was not viewed as scandalous, it was normal. To many rural residents, temperance reformers sounded less like moral leaders and more like outsiders, lecturing honest working people about how they should live. And in 1842, those tensions exploded in dramatic fashion. That year, two Troy attorneys, Ralph C. Hart and Charles Morris, traveled southeast of town to the Dye neighborhood, which is now the location of Dye Mill Road. Their mission was straightforward enough: deliver a public speech condemning the use of whiskey. But they had chosen the wrong audience. The Dye neighborhood was home to a local distillery owned and operated by a man named Lair, and many residents were fiercely loyal to both him and his business. As Hart and Morris began their lecture, the crowd grew restless. Then came the heckling, then the shouting, and finally, the rotten eggs. Historical accounts describe eggs flying through the air as the meeting collapsed into a disorder. Some stories even suggest whiskey itself was used to help break up the gathering. For the two attorneys, it was a humiliating disaster. Furious, Hart and Morris returned to Troy demanding justice. Several men accused of throwing the eggs were arrested and brought before the Miami County Judge Holt. The judge handed down a punishment that many considered shockingly harsh: 10 days in jail on nothing but bread and water. That sentence transformed a local disturbance into a county-wide controversy. News spread quickly around the countryside. Farmers gathered near the Broadford crossing of the Great Miami River, the wide, shallow crossing that gave the bridge its name. According to local historians, nearly 300 men assembled there to discuss freeing the prisoners from jail. What had begun as a disrupted lecture was now beginning to resemble an open rebellion. A delegation of men from the Dye community rode into Troy to confront the sheriff directly. They demanded the prisoners to be released. The sheriff refused. The situation immediately became more dangerous. Rumors swept through Troy that an armed mob intended to storm the county jail. Citizens feared the town could be attacked at any moment. Historian Thomas Harbaugh later wrote, "The most utmost excitement prevailed in Troy." The sheriff understood the danger better than anyone. Not only was the jail vulnerable, but he and his family lived there. If violence broke out, Troy itself could become a battlefield. Sheriff Johnson responded quickly. Militia units were called in from both Troy and nearby Piqua. The Lafayette Blues assembled in Troy, while Piqua sent companies of light infantry and mounted dragoons. Suddenly, Miami County looked less like a farming community and more like a military frontier. Men kissed their families goodbye, believing bloodshed might be unavoidable. Eventually, militia leaders decided the best place to stop the farmers was outside of Troy at the Broadford crossing. There, beside the river, the soldiers established a defensive encampment. Scouts searched nearby woods. Mounted patrols watched the roads. Sentries guarded the camps throughout the night. Everyone waited for the attack. But the attack never came. For 2 tense days, the militia remained on alert, while rumors continued to circulate across the county. Then, slowly it became clear, the feared uprising was over. Whether the farmers lost their nerve after seeing the military presence, or the threat had been exaggerated from the beginning, historians still debate. But no battle was ever fought. The Broadford Bridge War ended without a single shot being fired. The prisoners served their sentence on bread and water before returning home. The militia marched back to their communities, and Troy was spared the violence many had feared. Yet the conflict left behind something important. It revealed how deeply divided Americans had become already over the issues of morality, government authority, and personal freedoms long before the Civil War era. What makes the story remarkable is not the scale of the conflict, but how close ordinary people came to violence over questions that touched everyday life. Today, the Great Miami River flows quietly beneath the bridge. But in 1842, this peaceful place briefly stood at the edge of panic, confrontation, and possible bloodshed. And though the battle never came, the story of the Broadford Bridge War still echoes through the history of Troy, Ohio.